Good morning, everybody. There we go. All right, my name is Paul Rice. I'm the financial director here at Revive Church, but in my spare time when I'm not doing budgets and making sure that we're keeping the lights on and everything, I get the opportunity to speak to you this morning, share things that God has placed on my heart, and some things I have been studying specifically for this series. Really excited to jump into this. We're in a series called Jesus Amazed, and we have been talking about Jesus Amazed faith. What does that look like? Our theme verses for this entire series comes out of Hebrews 11:1 and Hebrews 11:6. It says, "Now faith is the assurance, the title deed or confirmation of things hoped for or divinely guaranteed, and the evidence of things not seen, the conviction of their reality." You see, faith comprehends as fact what can't be experienced by the physical senses. Hebrews 11:6 says, "But without faith it's impossible to please him. For whoever comes near to God must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him." This series has been all about moving past faith that just pleases God. Okay, great, we believe in him. Jesus died on the cross, that's awesome, all very important stuff. But we want to take our faith to the next level, the level that says, God, I'm willing to believe you for the impossible. God, I'm willing to believe you for the things that look like they can never happen. Out of a job, got financial problems, got marriage problems, whatever it is, we want to take our faith and elevate it to say, God, I believe that you can work and intervene in my life, and we're going to move into some Jesus-amazed faith. Hopefully you are working towards that and implementing what we've been talking about in this series. I know that for me, this series has been very, very impactful, and God has been revealing some things to me about my own personal faith level and my willingness to stick my faith out there. And I want to share a brief story with you about how God has worked miraculously in my life in the past. When I was in, I think it was first or second grade, I had to go get some glasses. Now, these were the 90s style glasses, the 80s, 90s style glasses with the big old lenses and everything, and yeah, huge glasses. Yeah, there I am. Now, I thought these were cool, man. Glasses were awesome. And these weren't just any ordinary glasses. They were Harley Davidson glasses. Yeah. Man, this case, it had this little faux leather top to the lid there, and it was this metal, like, felt like a biker with these glasses cases. And the side of the glasses frames had the Harley Davidson logo on there as well. But I thought they were the coolest things ever. Well, after a while, I discovered that they really weren't the coolest things ever. And also, I just got really tired of wearing them as well. Kind of a pain to carry the glasses around and make sure you don't lose them. I was just having trouble seeing the board, needed glasses. But fast forward a couple years later, and I was tired of wearing these things, and our church was having a prayer service specifically for healing, physical healing specifically. And I decided there in that moment that I was, not only was I tired of wearing these, but I wanted to be able to see without the aid of anything. And so I walked up to get prayed for. The guy prayed for me, and it wasn't an instantaneous thing. It was over a few days, and I was talking to my parents right after the first service, and my dad reminded me of a specific detail about this story that I had forgotten about, and I had put my faith out there and said, God, I believe that you're going to heal my eyesight, that I'm not going to have to wear these glasses anymore. And my dad reminded me, he said, there was this kind of internal struggle with you 3 or 4 days later. And you were just on the verge of, I don't know what to do. I want to believe that God has healed my eyesight, but I also want to be able to see the board at school. And, my dad had an opportunity to either squash that faith or to turn it over to me and strengthen that faith on the inside of me. And he made the choice. He said, look, whatever you want to do is going to be fine. You can either put them on, it's going to be fine. You're going to be able to see at school, or you can leave them. And that was the last that the glasses ever came up again. I took them off, I never put them back on again, and my eyesight has been fully restored. Now, I was never blind by any stretch of the imagination, but God had worked miraculously in my eyesight, so that way I didn't have to see with the aid of glasses anymore. Fast forward 20 years or so, I'm 30, and I've experienced a few things in life, and certainly not as much of those of you that are more seasoned than the rest of us, but I have experienced some things, some hardships, some relationship things, and just some reality. And I discovered in this series, God has been showing me that, Paul, you have allowed the reality of life, the hardship of life, to limit what you are willing to believe me for. I have gotten to this place where it was all about, okay, what do I know is real? What is reality? What does the math add up to? What does the timeline add up to? And I had forgotten that kind of faith that I had back when I was that little kid and was willing to extend it out there and believe God to heal my eyesight. And this series has been so helpful in opening that back up, taking that lid off of the capacity of my own faith and reaching back out there to God and saying, I believe you for the impossible because I know that you want the best for me. It's not enough for me just to be saved. That's awesome and it's important, but I want a deeper, more closer relationship with God based on a stronger faith than the previous day. And has really helped me reach back out there. And the story that we're going to read out of today, this guy had some issues with his eyesight as well, although he was actually born blind, so he had it a lot worse than I did. And he would have effectively been kind of the social outcast from the time that he was born, except for his parents, and nobody would really talk to him. So go ahead and turn in your Bibles to John 9, verse 1, and we're going to go all the way through verse 14, and then we're going to stop and talk about this passage. Verse 1, as he went along, and this is talking about Jesus. Jesus is leaving the temple. As Jesus went along, he saw a man that was blind from birth. His disciples asked him, and this is kind of an interesting question. They said, Rabbi, talking to Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now imagine if you had to get glasses early or you had some kind of health issue that you were born with. Can you imagine people walking up to your parents and going, so which one of you sinned? Yeah, somebody messed up here. But that's kind of what they're doing. Now, this was cultural, but it was also just a lack of understanding on their part of the modern, medical understanding that we have now, bacteria and viruses and diseases, and we understand where these things come from. They did not understand that back then. And so culturally, they began to associate. They said, we don't really understand this, so we're just going to say that somebody done messed up if you were born or you contracted a disease or something like that. And so they asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? But here's Jesus' response in verse 3. Look, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And I want to sidebar for just a second. All the miracles that we have been believing God for in this series, all of the things that we are believing God to intervene on our behalf in our lives, yes, you will benefit from them, but ultimately, it's for his glory. Ultimately, it's for him to work through you so that other people can see him in you, and you can say, hey, look what God did for me. It wasn't all the faith that I put out. It wasn't the prayers that I put out. It wasn't other people praying for me. It was God at work in my life that has gotten me this result, this miracle in my life. That's what Jesus is saying here. As long as it is day, in verse 4, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, here's the miracle part. Verse 6, after saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Jesus has an obsession with spitting on people. We've gone through several miracles. He's always spitting on the ground, making mud, putting his spit in people's faces. I really wish he would stop doing that. But the guy did it. So he allowed it to happen. Go, Jesus told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home saying, remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the importance of obedience in the fulfilling of your miracle. If you're going to exercise that kind of faith, you've got to be obedient. So this man was obedient. He went to the pool, he washed, and he came home seeing. Now, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Remember, this man was born blind. He would have been sitting and begging for years. Everybody would have known who he was. Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. He's just the doppelganger on Facebook. But the man himself insists. He said, no, it's me. Well, how are your eyes open then, they replied. He replied, the man they called Jesus, he'd only ever heard of this guy, he just met him once. The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes, which was a polite way of saying he spit on the ground, put that nasty spit mud in my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see. Now, I think this question of verse 12 is kind of funny. This man was blind. Where is the man, they asked him. I don't know. I didn't see him. So, the neighbor's response. So the neighbors brought the man and had a big party and celebrated and were super supportive and said, attaboy, way to go. It's awesome that Jesus healed your eyesight. No. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been born blind. which is the equivalent of calling up the Inspector General of the United States and saying, hey, this guy had a surgery now, he's well, can you look into that? They launched this entire investigation. And here's the basis of this investigation, verse 14. Now on the day which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes, that day was a Sabbath. Now there's something you need to understand about this whole Sabbath thing. The Pharisees were the religious leaders of the time, and the Jewish culture there was not a secular government like we experience today. It was actually a religiously run government. Not only did they control the religious aspects of the culture, but they also controlled the social justice aspects as well. And so they come up with all these little rules just to add on to what God had said about resting on the Sabbath. And one of these rules was you can't, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, and so you can't work the ground on the Sabbath. It was agrarian society. They had to plow the ground, they had to grow crops, things like that. And so they came up with this little detail that said, well, since you can't work the ground, since that's a sin, it's working on the Sabbath, what if there was like a seed of grass underneath the spot where you spit on the ground, and then you stirred it up a little bit? Well, then what if that seed grew? You have just worked the ground. You have just plowed and caused something to grow. Therefore, you have worked. Therefore, you're a sinner. Therefore, you are not from God. And so they're caught up in this whole thing of, well, it was the Sabbath. They couldn't even see the fact that the man's eyes had been opened. Now, when the Bible was put together, they have all the chapters and verses now, but that was put in there for our benefit, just so we could follow the story. Back then, whenever John would have been writing this, would have been a long letter. And we've inserted the chapters and verses, and there's also these little headers in there. And in the New American Standard Translation, it actually, before it goes into verse 13, it says, the controversy over the man. Some of your translations will say the Pharisees investigate the healing, like verse 13 picks up on. But I started thinking about this little header that they put in there, the controversy over the man. And that made me think about how good Americans are at generating some controversy. We are good at generating some controversy. And if you don't believe me, go log into Facebook or Twitter, scroll down about 5 clicks, and I guarantee that you will find something that people have gotten themselves worked up about, that they are just going bananas, they can't believe it, their friends are saying one thing, they believe this other thing. But Americans are great at controversy, and I started thinking about what are some recent controversies that have popped up on social media in the last few years. Now, the first one that I can think of is the Popeyes and the Chick-fil-A spicy chicken sandwich battle. That one I think it was very, very recent, maybe like a month ago. And what had happened was Popeyes came out with a spicy chicken sandwich. A guy ate it 3 months later, blasted it on Twitter, and said, wow, this thing is amazing. And now we have this whole thing where everybody is questioning the holy grail of chicken sandwiches, and they're saying, no, Popeyes is better. And I would just like to say that they're wrong. Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich is much, much better. Now, there was actually a satirical news site called the Babylon Bee. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's they write satirical articles, and they got a hold of this, and they wrote several good ones, but I think the best one that they wrote had the headline of Chick-fil-A installs confessionals for people who have eaten at Popeyes in case they want to repent. And they had to, say like 10 Hail Cathys or something like that and eat some chicken nuggets. There was another one that was a little bit more serious. It was a Microsoft. Microsoft came out with, 2016, I think, they came out with this artificial intelligence bot. Now, a bot is something that is automatically posting things on behalf of a company or another person, but it's the computer doing it, not the individual. And Microsoft looped artificial intelligence into this. That way, this Twitter bot named Tay, T-A-Y, Tay, hashtag Tay tweets, would learn from people responding to its Twitter feed. Now, here's the problem. Anytime you crowdsource information from the internet, you're not going to like the result that you get. It's going to be bad. As an example, there was the British research station had built this big new research vessel. They were going to go out to the ocean, study the marine life or whatever it is they do. And so they crowdsourced the internet. They said, Internet, what should we name this boat? Bad idea. The internet nominated and came up with the name Boaty McBoatface. You can look this up, it is real. Boaty McBoatface. Crowdsourcing the internet, asking the internet for their opinion is a bad thing. Similarly with Tay, Microsoft was asking the internet to help it to learn to interact with humans. Now, the problem is, in all of our wonderful human morality, and we're just such good people, the internet managed to take Tay, just a very innocent looking, hello world, gotta go to bed, I'm interested to learn about you. They took Tay and they turned her into the most racist, bigoted, misogynistic, xenophobic AI bot ever in existence. In fact, it was so bad that they shut the entire bot down, I think it was within 16 hours. People were responding all of these horrible things to Tay's Twitter feed, and I'm not going to repeat them in church because they're not appropriate, but just go look them up if you're interested. So that was a big controversy. Microsoft ended up, they shut it down. They had to issue this big apology, please don't boycott us or anything like that. We're sorry, of course, it was the internet's fault. It wasn't really their fault in general, but that was a big controversy. Now, I hope you're ready to get a little uncomfortable. This one might pull at your belief system just a little bit here. But does anybody remember the Dove Facebook soap ad that came out? This one? Yeah. This one was quite serious. And there was a lot of people, it was so serious because there was a lot of people that really felt very strongly that it was quite racist. That dirty was coming to clean. And so, man, it hit Dove hard. People were furious about this, and Dove had to pull the ad down. They issued a big apology. It was this serious thing. And that controversy, I think, was probably one of the more serious ones that I can think of. And the last one that I can think of as well is the one that probably broke the internet the worst, I think. It lasted quite a long time. It pitted friend against friend. It pitted brother and sister against brother and sister, families against each other. And that was the black and blue in the white or gold dress. Anybody remember this thing? This thing was, it was all over the internet. And the original picture is there in the middle, I think it was. And then they've messed with the lighting on it just to kind of show you what different people's brains were processing this as. And by the way, if you saw it as black and blue, you're wrong. It was white and gold. So actually, I think the owners came out and said that it was black and blue. But man, this thing, if you remember, it blew the internet up. Man, people were so mad about this. They would get in debates with all their friends. And these controversies that we see on social media, most of us are rarely ever on the receiving end of this controversy. Usually we're just, bystanders looking at it going, oh, well, I believe this, or I believe that, or, well, the dress is actually white. No, it's blue. But this man was actually on the receiving end of all of the controversy that was surrounding this miracle that Jesus had done in his life. Somebody's blindness getting cured caused a bunch of controversy. And the reason it caused controversy is because miracles have a tendency to disrupt somebody's belief system. They have a tendency to mess up. It messes with it. The evidence and the results of a miracle can really screw up people's belief systems. And so instead of being supportive, instead of being, oh yeah, that's awesome, man, I'm so glad that you got your eyes healed, everybody's, yeah, big party, they launch an investigation. We've got a lot of that going on in our government right now. A lot of investigations. They knew about it back then too. So the Pharisees, the religious leaders, launched this big investigation. And I'm not going to read through the entire text, and I would encourage you to go back and read it for yourself. And I'm just going to paraphrase for the sake of time. There were 3 phases to this investigation. The first phase was the Pharisees actually called the guy up, and it was a cultural custom and law that anytime you got healed of a disease, you had to present yourself before the religious leaders so they could clear you to go back and live in society, especially if you had leprosy or something like that, something that was very contagious. So this man did that, but they also had ulterior motives as well. They weren't there just to clear him. They were concerned that Jesus had performed this thing on the Sabbath, and that was really hacking them off. It had disrupted their beliefs, and there's 3 belief systems that get disrupted in this story. The first one is the religious beliefs, and I'm going to delineate this from the other 2 for good reason, because the religious beliefs, these are the people that have grown up in Sunday school. They have gone to get their degree in theology or whatever it is. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they've got their own ideas about how God works. And anything that opposes that idea, they don't like. And they get uptight about it, and it breaks their traditions. They're going, oh, God doesn't heal anymore. You can't make God do stuff. You can't exercise faith like that. It doesn't work like that. But then this miracle comes along, and breaks the traditions that these Pharisees had about not doing work on the Sabbath. And they just could not get past it in their heads. They were so stuck and fixated on this thing that their religious beliefs had been so upset. They were just mad. They were just mad. They were just mean. And their religious beliefs had gotten upset as a result. The second type of belief system that gets upset, I think I've got it up the screen, as your beliefs, but really it could be anyone else's beliefs aside from the religious people. These are people that, maybe they believe in God, maybe they don't, but they've got their own opinions about how the world should work as well. And a miracle has the potential to change these beliefs. And that's what happened with this man, I believe. When we see this man in the story, they're having a conversation with the Pharisees, and the Pharisees don't believe him. And so they bring his parents in. His parents cop out and say, well, you should actually go back and talk to our son because he's a grown man. But the reason they were doing that is because anybody that was caught acknowledging Jesus as a good guy, they were actually socially and religiously excommunicated. That means that they would not have had access to any of the cleansing rituals or the purification rituals that were required by the law of God. They would have been cast out not only of the temple, but they would have been social outcasts as well. So his parents cop out whenever they call him in and say, you know what, you just ask him. We're going to plead the fifth is basically what they did. And so then the Pharisees call the man back. They didn't believe him the first time, so they're going to talk to him again. They're going to try to talk him out of this miracle he's received. And so we see that in this part of the passage that the man actually begins defending the very identity of Jesus. He begins defending Jesus in the face of social and religious excommunication. He's not going to have access to his friends anymore, his family, or the temple. And this man is defending Christ in the face of all this. He's standing up to these religious leaders. And everybody else's beliefs, including this man's, he would have grown up with all of these cultural expectations, these religious understandings, and that miracle, especially because it was done in his life, began to upset and disrupt everything that he had ever grown up learning. It began to change his perspective. You read the story, you see that he moves from, well, yeah, Jesus healed my eyes, to all the way to the end was where he gets tossed out of the temple because he is defending the identity of Christ. The third set of beliefs that get upset and disrupted is unbelief. Unbelief. Miracles and Jesus-amazed faith has the potential to disrupt your unbelief. It has the potential to turn your entire life around and say, maybe I didn't used to follow Jesus, but I'm following Jesus now. Again, we see that in the story of this man as well. He goes from somebody who had only ever just heard of Jesus. He said, the man they called Jesus did this. He put the mud in my eyes. He'd only ever heard of the guy. He wasn't a follower of Jesus. He didn't believe in this guy. I mean, who is this guy? So what? He was willing to obey. And by the end of the story, we see, we'll pick it up in the last couple of verses here, verse 34 and 35. Check this out. After he got tossed out of the temple, Jesus had heard that they put him out. And finding him, Jesus has actually gone and sought this guy out. I think that's the only miracle in the New Testament I can find where Jesus was the one seeking the guy out. The guy wasn't seeking Jesus out at this point. Jesus actually heard about his faith. He heard about the defense this guy mounted in the face of all this, the religious leaders. And so Jesus says, I got to go find this guy. That's incredible. It doesn't say it explicitly, but you got to know Jesus is going, man, I can't believe that guy did that. I'm going to go find him. So he goes and finds him. And he says, do you believe in the Son of Man? Now, this phrase, Son of Man, is like asking somebody today, hey, do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in God? Do you believe he died on the cross? That's effectively what he's asking. Do you believe in the Messiah? Look at the man's response. He answered, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said, you have both seen him, and he is the one who's talking with you. Remember, the man had not seen Jesus yet. His faith was staked in the evidence of the miracle that had occurred in his life. He'd talked to Jesus once. And by the time Jesus finds him again, he was all in. He's like, yeah, Lord, I believe. He says, you've both seen him, and he's the one talking to you. He said, Lord, I believe, and he just worshiped him there on the spot. This man's entire belief system went from unbelief to a full-fledged belief in a relationship with Jesus Christ like that, all because of a miracle that had occurred in his life. And the faith that he had staked it on the miracle that had occurred, just the evidence of that miracle. Had never seen Jesus, but he was staking it on that belief. And I think that's probably the most powerful part of this story, just the fact that God had enough grace. God had the wherewithal. He cared so much about this man that he was willing to perform a miracle in somebody's life who didn't even follow Jesus, He didn't believe in Jesus at the time. But God cared so much about he cared more about the relationship than he cared about the rules that he was breaking to get a hold of that man and to have a relationship with him and to get him to the point where he's saying, God, I believe. God, I believe. And I think that's so important and so powerful because there are going to be those of us, even here today, maybe you're a follower of Jesus, maybe you're not. But God is willing to do whatever it takes to grab a hold of you. He is willing to do whatever it takes to have a relationship with you. And if you're questioning, you're going, I don't know about all this God stuff. Paul, I see what you're talking about, faith, everything, that's great, but I'm just not sure how that applies to me. I would challenge you to ask God for a miracle because he had enough grace to give this man a miracle in his state. As a social outcast, as a non-follower of Jesus, God said, I will work in your life. I'll do it. And we're going to see something amazing come out of this. This man was an unbeliever, and yet God was still willing to do whatever it took to get him. And when you read this story, you see his response, this man's response to the Pharisees. In verse 24 and 25, when the Pharisees are questioning him for a second time, I want you guys to see how this man's faith has evolved from the beginning of the story to now. It says, so a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man, talking about Jesus, is a sinner. Then he answered, this is the man. Check out this response. I hope I could be this bold someday. Whether he's a sinner, I don't know. But one thing I do know is that I was blind, but now I see. One thing I know is that I was blind, but now I see. You're telling me all this stuff. You're telling me Jesus is a sinner. You're telling me this is a load of garbage. But I used to be blind, and now I see. So what do you have to say to that? And this man has grown in faith by leaps and bounds. And, we've had people who have, started coming to Revive, or they've started coming to church. We've got people's stories here. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't. But when people opt to enter into this relationship with Christ, they say, I'm not sure about all this God stuff, but I'm going to start seeking Christ. I'm going to start chasing after Jesus. And, you see positive things begin to happen in their life. Addictions begin to break off. Relationships begin to get restored. And instead of their neighbors and friends being supportive, yes, that's awesome. We're happy for you. We don't know how it's working, but we're happy for you. Instead, they encounter opposition and challenges to the brand new faith that they've grasped a hold of. And I would encourage you, if you're ever finding yourself in that situation where you are being opposed and you're being challenged and the people are telling you that church doesn't care about you, those people in that church in your small group, they don't love you, that church is just trying to use you, they just want your money, whatever it is, God's not real, it's fake. I would encourage you to look back at the one thing. What is the one thing that you can go back and stake your entire faith on? What is the one thing that you can look back and go, wow, people are telling me all this stuff, and, I don't know how to respond to that. But what I do know is that my marriage was on the rocks, and now it's restored. I do know that I was sick, and now I'm healed. I do know that people came around me and supported me when I didn't have a job financially, and now God has blessed me with a new job. I don't know exactly how it happened, but I see the evidence at work in my life. And so I'm going to stake my faith on that one thing. Just what is that one thing in your life? I would highly encourage you guys to find it. What is that one thing? Martin, can you come up and play for just a minute? And as Martin's playing, we're going to take the next few moments, and I want you guys to think about that one thing that you can look back and stake your faith on whenever the going gets tough, whenever you've got opposition, whenever you've got people telling you that this is all fake, whenever you've got people telling you that nobody cares about you, when you got people telling you that God hates you, or that you're too messed up, or that you can never recover. What is the one thing? Pastor Stephen passed out these the cards several weeks ago where everybody wrote down the things that they were going to be believing God for throughout this series. What are the things that you're going to exercise some Jesus-amazed faith on? And if you have those cards, go ahead and pull them out. If you don't, it's okay. Get a smartphone out, get a piece of paper out, whatever it is. And I want you guys to either flip that card over on the back or get your paper out. And I want you to let's just take the next 60 seconds and think about what is the one thing that you can look back on? What's the one thing you've seen God do in your life? Maybe he's restored a relationship. Maybe he's brought you back into connection with your son or your daughter who was estranged. Maybe he's restored your marriage. Maybe he's healed your body. Whatever it is. For me, my one thing was God rescuing me from an addiction to pornography and to lust. It was about 10 years or so, but God brought me out of that. It was a process and it was a struggle. But I can look back whenever temptation comes, whenever hardship comes, I can look back and I can say, God may seem like a mean guy right now. It may seem like things aren't going the way that I want it to, but I know God will not fail me because he has brought me out of this issue with pornography. And now, I was fearful of ever being able to have a normal relationship with a woman because of what pornography does to your brain. It rewires it. And God has fixed all of that. And now I'm married. We got a kid on the way. It's amazing. And I can look back at that and go, wow, look at what you have done in my life, God. And I want you guys to be able to have the same thing. Now, maybe you don't have that. Maybe you can't look back and go, I can't think of one time where God has brought me out of something, where God has worked miraculously in my life. I dare you. I triple dog dare you to ask God for a miracle, to ask God to intervene in your life in an area where it seems like it's impossible for anything positive to come out of it, where it seems like that job that you need so desperately seems impossible, or it seems that the relationship that you've lost, it's impossible to recover that. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, I dare you to ask God for that miracle. I dare you.